Should the Atlanta Braves re-sign Max Fried? We'll get into it next. Yes, welcome on into Braves Today for Tuesday, October 8th. Your home for news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. He's Christian Rauh. Follow him on Twitter at Christian S. Rauh. You can find all of our written work, bravestoday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack. And Christian, we didn't get a show in yesterday because, I had some medical issues and had to get all checked out for everything for that. But I was able to do some writing. And I dropped 2,100 words on Max Fried this morning. And that's who I want to focus on today because he's a free agent. And I made a tweet over the weekend talking about the projection or the market value for Max Fried, that he was given by Spotrac. And a lot of people had a lot of thoughts and ideas about Max Fried, right? This is Spotrac, not me. They said his market value is $22.7 million a year. They estimated, or they said the proper value for his next contract is 6 years and $136 million. I want to talk about it because I feel like there's arguments that, yes, you should pay that. There's arguments that, no, you shouldn't. But what is a likely contract for him? Is he going to get that? Is he going to get more? So let's break it down. And if you want all of this in written form, by the way, bravestoday.com. It's out there. That is our free Substack. It's there. But I think something that I've noticed in the discourse about Max Fried is people think that he actually hasn't been that good. And I don't think we have the proper understanding of exactly how good Max Fried has been in his career. He debuted in 2017 and he was up and down, just 9 starts in those 2 seasons, but he made 29 appearances, a lot of relief stuff. But he became a full-time starter in 2019. So 2019 to now, there are 20 pitchers total that have made 142 starts or more and have pitched 824 or more innings. Did you think, and Max Fried is obviously in that group, did you think that number would be higher or lower?
I'd have to say a little higher. Yeah, I think that I would be, the missed time and all that stuff that we've seen from Max Fried. I thought that we'd see a little bit more time. I think that's why you get this narrative of fans against Max Fried saying that he doesn't pitch well, and I think it's because of his availability. I think that's what messes with him a little bit, and in my mind. So I don't think it has anything to do with his actual performance on the mound, but I think that there's maybe a little bit of fatigue, if you will, just seeing there's always been an injury. I mean, how many times has there been a season since 2019 where he hasn't had an injury at least just one time?
Fun fact, there is not. He's got on the IL every season since 2019 for something. And we'll get into kind of breaking down the injured list placements and the innings and stuff in a minute. But I find it really interesting in that 20 pitcher sample, again, 142 starts or more since 2019, Max Fried's ERA, I want you to guess where among those 20 pitchers, where he ranks in ERA.
Top 5, probably. Close.
Second. He has a 3.07 ERA. I'm sorry. He has a 3.06 ERA in that sample. The only pitcher who has made as many starts as Max Fried with a better ERA since 2019 is Garrett Cole. Garrett Cole, 158 starts. Again, Fried has 142. Cole has a 2.98 ERA. Cole's winning percentage is .705. Fried's is .696. Fried's winning percentage is also second in that sample. But the names that are behind Max Fried in that in that grouping as far as ERA, there's some good pitchers in there. Zach Wheeler, 3.14. Zach Gallen, 3.29. Aaron Nola, 3.89. Pablo Lopez, 3.89. Dylan Cease, 3.75. Yu Darvish, 3.67. Like, so many pitchers in this sample have made as many or more starts than Fried, but haven't been as good as he has. And I think that that's something where people don't really understand, I think, how good Max Fried has been in the regular season. He is tied with, I believe it's Cole and Nola in complete games and shutouts. All three of those guys have 6 complete games and 4 shutouts. Fried's walks per 9 innings is 4th lowest in that sample. His homer total, both by rate and by sheer number, is 2nd out of those 20 pitchers, behind only Logan Webb. And like, sometimes we miss the forest for the trees on like how good Max Fried has been as a starter for the Atlanta Braves. And I don't think I would have had Max Fried in the top 5 in any of those stats had I not pulled them up and looked at them to write the piece.
Yeah, the Garrett Cole part is really interesting to me, especially when you're talking about what he might get in free agency, because you talk about he has the second best ERA across that span, across those innings, with the exception of Garrett Cole.
Yeah.
Garrett Cole signed a contract in 2020 in his age 29 season, so to just be 1 year earlier than Max Fried. 9 years, $324 million with a $36 million AAV. Now, I don't think Max Fried is going to get that much money, but
No.
it's nice to just put it in that perspective that you're the second best pitcher across that span with that statistic you just showed me. And that one pitcher won a Cy Young, is a Cy Young winner in Garrett Cole, and is making $36 million a year. So when we start getting to these numbers and what Spotrac's saying, it's starting to look like a value a little bit, Lindsay.
Yeah. I mean, and I think some of that's going to go into the contract that Max Fried gets. And we're going to kind of break down some of those comps and things like that later and some of the likely targets for it. But I do think at the same time, we have to acknowledge, as good as Max Fried's been in the regular season, he has struggled in the postseason. He has 20 career appearances in the postseason, 12 starts. This was something where early in his career, he was a reliever in the postseason. And I think it's since either 2018 or 19 is when he just became solely a starter in the postseason. 20 total appearances, 2-5 record, 5.10 ERA for Max Fried. And I don't want people to think that like he had one bad relief outing that skewed that. As a starter in the postseason, it's a 4.90 ERA. He has some very, very high profile, successful outings in the postseason. Game 6 of the World Series, he gets stomped on at first base and then just turns around and is dominant. Doesn't allow the Astros to score as Atlanta easily wins that to win the World Series. But as a whole in the postseason, he's not been that great. Clayton Kershaw is a multi-time Cy Young winner who is considered to be a dude that just doesn't show up in October, right? 8 pitchers have thrown 67 postseason innings since 2018. Max Fried is obviously one of the 8. Fried's ERA is dead last. 5.10 ERA is worst of all of those. Kershaw, by comparison, has a 4.73. He has 6 wins to Fried's 2. So, for as bad as we say that Clayton Kershaw has been in the postseason, and a body of work basis, Max Fried has been worse than Kershaw. And again, no pitcher with at least 67 innings since 2018, which is when Fried became a postseason starter, has a worse ERA than Max Fried. Is the postseason performance as a whole something that you think impacts the contract, or is this such a small sample size? And admittedly, Fried does have multiple injury concerns that have impacted his availability in the postseason. 22, he had that flu where he lost 15 pounds going into the postseason, got shelled by Philly. Last year, he was on the IL for blister. I think he made like 2 starts in September, came off the IL for the start and got blasted by Philly again. Do we think that teams are looking at that postseason track record when they decide whether or not to sign Max Fried, or is this more about the body of work in the regular season?
When you look at it big picture and you see only 67 innings pitched, You let up 38 earned runs across those 67 times. When you're looking at from other teams, looking before they start digging deep, that's 7 years worth of playoff experience, and you're not showing that you can be productive. So I think in that case, it's concerning. But when you're looking at if the Braves are reevaluating the situation, or if a team decides to get actually really deep into the whole situation itself, I think it becomes less concerning because then you do bring up those other intangibles like the injuries, like the 15-pound lost flu game and things like that. So I think that that's where it becomes, smaller in the sake of being concerning. But who knows how deep the teams will actually look at that process if they'll decide and think like, okay, we can just see this postseason track record and we don't know if that's the right thing to go. That's why that valuation is going to go down. Or if they use that as an excuse to make that valuation stay down. Regardless, I do think that it's somewhat of a concern, but it depends on how you look at it, Lindsay, because just based on the numbers, super concerning, as you mentioned, dead last. But you just gave three or four reasons why we have seen those numbers decline. Not that it's a good thing to have those reasons or
Right.
excuses or however you want to call them, but they're there for a reason. They're not there because he choked in a certain situation. It's because he's had injuries.
Mhm.
In the one game against the Padres this past playoffs, he got hit with a pretty hard comebacker that started
Like
hurting him. Another
105,
possible
yeah.
injury. So there's a lot of small little anecdotes, if you will, that have changed the course of his postseason career. So I personally don't think you should take those numbers as gospel, but I
Mhm.
can see other teams doing so.
Yeah, and since I pulled up the postseason game log, so he became a postseason starter in 2020. He has 6 quality starts among his 12 postseason starts. He had 3 in 2020. He had 3 in 2021. He had a 6 inning shutout of the Brewers in the NLDS. He had a 6 innings, 2 runs allowed against the Dodgers in the NLCS. He got blown up in 21 in the rematch against LA in the postseason. And then after a blow up against the Astros in game 2, he rebounded with that game 6. And again, the last 3 starts not been good. You do have an injury caveat on all 3 of those. And so it is something where I'm assuming that the league is not going to hold the postseason outings, the recent ones, against him simply because of those injury concerns. And if you just look at, this isn't necessarily fair or sound, if you just look at 20 and 21's postseasons, 9 starts, he went 2-3 with a 3.68 ERA. It's a lot more manageable and acceptable performance on the biggest stages versus what you've seen in 22, 23, and 24, when objectively it wasn't just Fried. The entire roster struggled in those 3 postseasons. So I feel like they're not going to hold this against him too much.
And to add a little bit more to that, 20 and 21, the two years you referred to, 50 of his 67 innings came from there. So the majority of your argument right there is the majority of his postseason career. So even though you did say at the beginning of this segment that there isn't a relief appearance where it's skewed a little bit, that last outing that you had was only 2 innings. Although he started it, it's almost like a relief appearance, and it did
Yeah.
skew it with his 8 hits, his 5 runs allowed. So I do think there's a little bit of skewed. I do think we might have a little bit of recency bias as
Mm-hmm.
well when we get to the offseason. I think that's where some of the fans are at when we start talking about the poll that happened over on Twitter this past week. But I do think that you're right. I don't think they're going to hold it against them because I think we've seen Max Fried, in some really prime opportunities, do some really big things, even in the postseason, especially in 20 and 21. And if I might remind fans, I'm not sure if, since we're on a Braves podcast, I'm not sure if they remember this, but in 2021, you guys won the World Series.
Yeah, that is, kind of nice that Atlanta was able to, win the World Series there. Probably relevant to mention again. All right, in just a second, we're going to talk about some of the injury questions and some of the, the good and the bad behind his availability and how it's impacted that postseason. We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay, Crosby, Christian Rauh. We're talking about Max Fried's free agency here, and we admitted, I guess, that those three most recent postseason outings have had an injury caveat to them. And the injuries are something we have to discuss with Max Fried, because two things can be true at once. Max Fried has gone on the IL a lot. He's also pitched a lot of innings despite that. So we touched on this earlier in the show. Fried has gone on the IL once every single season since 2019. So since he's been a starter, he's missed time in every single season. He had a blister in 2019. Missed 11 days. He had muscle spasms in his back in 2020, missed 9 days. In 21, he had a strained hamstring, 21 days. That one, if I remember right, was not fielding his position. He was running the bases. And then he had a blister later in the year, missed 11 days. 22, he had a concussion, missed 10 days. 23, strained a hamstring, fielding his position in the season opener, missed 16 days. Missed 90 with the forearm strain. That's the only significant injury he's had. And then another blister at the end of the season, missed 15 days. And then this season, the ulnar neuritis, missed 17 days. That's forearm, that's nerve inflammation. It sounds a lot scarier when you call it neuritis than just inflammation, but that's what that was. And so he's missed 200 days across the last 6 seasons, 200 combined days across the last 6 seasons. But also, despite that, he's still top 20 for workload, right? Only it's the same group of pitchers that have made more starts than Fried and have pitched more innings. He's had, where was it here? He's had 824.2 innings in the regular season since 2019. That is 17th of those 20 guys, and 2 of those that he's That's all right. I'm sorry. It's 18th, not 17th. It's 18th. And Marcus Stroman and Yusei Kikuchi are the only 2 that have pitched less than Fried in that sample. They've combined for 15 relief appearances, so they haven't been full-time starters. So workload-wise, Fried's top 20 in the sport. At the same time, he's never exceeded the 185 innings. He had 185 in 2022. That was his Cy Young runner-up year. 165 and 2/3 in 2 other seasons, and this year 174.1. So if I told you could sign a pitcher that would give you 100, let's say 175 innings, let's just round to the middle, 175 innings, but is going to go on the injured list at least once, would you sign up for that? Or is that the fact that he's going to miss time, is that turning you off?
If it's Max Fried, I'm taking it. I mean, because even though he's had just a certain amount of, injuries, across those 6 years, they haven't been too crazy, with the exception of that forearm strain that happened in 2023. That missed a good 3 months or so.
That's the only time he's been on the 60-day IL was that.
So I will say this, he gets all these little injuries, and I think it is more fan fatigue, more Braves fatigue, if anything. Braves fan fatigue, probably should add both those words in there. That with those injuries, you feel like he's not available. But that's not the case, and I think that's why we're trying to really make this point here. Whether he hasn't exceeded 185 innings this season or not, I don't think that that's a big deal, especially now of an age. If this was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, not exceeding 185 innings would be like, okay, that's a huge red flag for a starting pitcher. I don't think that's that big of a deal anymore, Lindsay. I think him staying around the 175 mark, and if he even has that 115-day IL stint, is okay. If you can continue to be a top 1-2 starter in the rotation for the majority of the season. 162 games is a lot. It's a chess match. So having a missed start or 2 across the 162 game season, that doesn't sound like a big deal to me. And that's what we've got for the majority of his career, at least over the last 6 years, with the exception of 2023. And, I'm personally taking that, 7 days a week.
Yeah. I went back and looked. No Braves pitcher has gone over 185 and 2/3 innings in that entire time span. Not a single one. Or correction, I think Strider had 186 last year. But nobody's going above 185, 186. Morton had it in 21. Nobody's really. Morton's in that 20 pitcher sample, by the way. Morton's also posted since 2019. But nobody's really doing that on this team. And that's because of what we saw this year. We saw the extra rest days. We saw the extra, not skipping starts, but pushing starts back with the extra rest. Chris Sale led the team with 177 and 2/3 innings. He didn't go on the IL once. Fried went on the IL and still had 174 and a third. Behind that, Morton had 165, Lopez had 135, and Schwellenbach had 123. Like, that's just not the modern game with what Atlanta likes to do. They're trying to get these guys to the postseason not being out of gas. That's what they're trying to do here. So I don't think that's as concerning. I kind of agree with you. I don't think it's as concerning as people might think it is. And I do think that unlike a lot of the other guys that you see on the market, I do think that Fried's stuff is going to age pretty well because he's not like both physically and arsenal wise. Physically, he's not carrying a bunch of extra weight. He's not like a just a heavy set person, which that leads to knee issues and leg issues. And I'm thinking about some of the guys who we've seen who are bigger pitchers and how they struggle. Alek Manoah, CC Sabathia, like guys who have been good but have struggled with weight and things like that in the past. And then, like, you can see his stuff maybe not being as good as the rest of that sample. His strikeouts, he's 18th of 20 in that sample, 8.7 K through 9, 797. Logan Webb and Marcus Stroman Owens behind him. His fastball velocity is right at average for a lefty, right? Lefties average 93.2 this year. He throws his fastball averages 93.9. 45th percentile in baseball, right there above average for lefties. But the good thing is he's also not fastball dependent. I mean, he legitimately throws three different fastballs. He throws a four-seamer, a sinker, and a cutter. And then he also has a curveball, a sweeper, a slider, a change. He has 7 pitches. And the star of the show is really the off-speed stuff. Fried's not putting a lot of dudes away with the fastball. He's putting them away with the curveball. He's putting them away with the sweeper. Those are all things that aren't as reliant on velocity to be good. And so you would think that Fried should be able to age well, assuming that those injuries don't become more frequent or require more 60-day stints versus 30s or 10s or 15s or whatever. And I do feel like, with the exception of the forearm strain, it's been a lot of really random stuff that's not really any fault of his. The only thing that's recurring is the blister, right? The hamstring injuries, the two of them happen different ways. A concussion is not a lingering thing. The back spasms, the elbow inflammation, like those are all isolated things. Yes, he's had the blister 3 times. But I feel like I'm not too worried about his stuff getting worse as he ages because he has good location, he has good sequences, and he's not reliant on velocity.
Yeah, if you're giving me a 162 game sample of Max Fried, and the only time he misses time is because he has a blister, like, I'm taking that all the time, Lindsay. Yeah. 100%. You look at his last season, he had 29 starts over last season. 19 of those 29, so that's about 70%, at least 6 innings or more in his outings this season. And that's counting what he started with. Let's remember what Max Fried had at the beginning of the season this year. It was dreadful. Do you remember his first start, his first 2 starts? I mean, we're talking about 10.
His ERA was like 20 after the first 2 starts.
Yeah, I think it was actually 18. Yeah, looking at MLB.com, which was 18, which is insane. But there was a lot of concern at the beginning of the season of what was going on with Max Fried. I think he didn't even get out of the first inning in his first start at Philadelphia. Then he finally started to figure it out. And then we got complete games out of him down the stretch. 70%, I think just a little under 70% of his starts this season went 6 innings or more. There was multiple times where he went 7 and 8 innings. That's where that longevity comes in. That's where I think you could really get your meat and potatoes. And that's where I think he earns his money, knowing that when you get him on the mound, 7 out of 10 times in this case, you are going to be able to save your bullpen moving forward. That is a huge thing to have at the top of your rotation if he's your 1 or 2 moving forward. And that's why I think it's a really good idea to consider keeping Max Fried moving forward. I know we're going to get into the numbers here and see if it's actually worth it, but I do definitely think that there's a huge consideration for him. And that's one of the big reasons where I'm looking at. He provides length. He provides quality length a majority of the time of his starts, and he's been proving it year after year despite the injuries.
Yeah. All right, so let's get to that contract real quick because, again, 6 years, $136.3 million, rounds to 22.7. If that is the number, Atlanta can do it. Atlanta, now, let's caveat here. The Braves have never signed a multi-year deal for anybody of more than $22 million AAV. They did give Josh Donaldson a 1-year, $23 million deal in 2019, but they've never signed somebody to more than $22 million. Matt Olson's stops there. Austin Riley's stops there. Spencer Strider's stops there. Nobody is going to make sales. Sales extension brought his down to 22 million. Like, nobody is going past 22 million. But some of the offers Atlanta has given would have gone over that. The last reported Freddie Freeman contract proposal was 140 million over 6 years. That's 23.3. Reportedly, and this was reported by Philly media, Alex Anthopoulos pushed back on this. Reportedly, the Aaron Nola contract offer last offseason was 6 years and 162, which is $27 million a year. Again, Anthopoulos pushed back on that. We don't know if it is true or not. That was reported by Philly media, not by Atlanta media. But if Fried's contract ends up in that $22, $23 million range, I think the Braves can match it. I'm comfortable the Braves can do it. The issue is there going to be somebody else that comes in way over the top and blows Atlanta out of the water? The two teams I'm concerned about is the Dodgers and the Padres. The Padres, they just lost Joe Musgrove to Tommy John. He left that brave start. He's going to be out all of next year, won't be back until midway through 2026. He'll be a free agent, I think, after 26 as well. So they lose Joe Musgrove. Dylan Cease is also a free agent after 26. Would they pay 28, 29, 30 million to get Fried, so they have Fried, Dylan Cease, Michael King, Yu Darvish? That's terrifying. Do the Dodgers, who have like 5 or 6 different starters on the IL right now, do they go out and throw $30 million at Fried on like 7 years? And if they do, how much of that is deferred for a long time? And then does a mystery team like the Cubs swoop in and sign Fried? I think if it's 6 years and near $22 million, I think Atlanta moves up enough where you could see Fried give a hometown discount to Atlanta and stay. I just worry that it's going to be some team throwing up either 28 to 30 a year or offering something like 7 or 8 years when Atlanta probably doesn't want to go past 5 or 6. Am I weird for thinking that?
No, I think you're right on the money there. I think that if it's around the 22, 23 mark that Spotrac is mentioning, then I think that the Braves are right in the money. I think if we start getting over the 25, 26 mark, I think that's when you start having some concern. I think I'm right with you with Dodgers, Padres. I think that's a lot of things. I'm going to add 2 more teams into the mix here, and one of them is a concern here is the San Francisco Giants. Not for them to sign Max Fried, but what happens with Blake Snell, Lindsay?
Yeah,
another left-hander. If he opts out, that changes the market considerably for Max Fried, because that considerably will make Blake Snell the top left-hander out on the market. That could change the contract. That could actually work out in the Braves' favor, keeping that AAV down a little bit to re-sign Max Fried. And then I'm going to throw one more team out there on the East Coast. I think Max Fried could be actually a really good fit for the Baltimore Orioles if they can't re-sign Corbin Burnes.
Yeah, that's something they got to figure out, something in that rotation, and losing Burnes, using that money they're paying Burnes to pay Fried would be, that's also kind of terrifying. I hadn't thought about him. I was thinking Giants, Padres, Dodgers, Braves, obviously, and then like the Cubs. I think the Cubs would be, he is good friends with Dansby Swanson. They have reportedly wanting to find a top tier starting pitcher in free agency. I think that'd be a good fit as well. For what it's worth, I did put out a poll on Twitter over the weekend. 2,855 people responded. 68% think Max Fried will get more than 6 years, $136 million. I also think the same thing. So I'm on board with that. Again, I think if Fried's offers are all capped at max 24 or 25, I think the Braves have a chance to bring him back. If it goes above 25 or it goes above 6 years, I think he's probably gone. Let us know what you think. If you're listening on audio, obviously, one, leave us a 5-star review. That'd be great. But you can tweet at us. I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. He's on Twitter at Christian S. Rauh. If you're on YouTube, drop it in the comments down below. Let us know what you think about what Max Fried's next contract is going to be. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. Anything else on Max Fried before we go, Christian?
I'm going to just say my prediction. I think that he winds up getting, let's just assume that Blake Snell stays with the Giants. If that happens and he is the top left-hander in the market, he's going to get $30 million a year. And I think that's going to push the Braves out of the market. So, yeah, that's where I sit. But if Blake Snell does opt in, I think that's where the Braves can hop in. So you want Blake Snell to be in the free agency. If you're a Braves fan, you want Max Fried back on your team in 2025.
Yeah. This has been Braves Today for Tuesday, October 8th. We'll see you guys tomorrow on Braves.